1979, Nicaragua has been in a constant state of disarray and political unrest. Poverty is widespread and access to healthcare is limited. Most ask, what happened? A revolution. Many people have the perception that a revolution is a that they're overthrowing a corrupt government and fixing their ways, and that, supposedly, after reforms, the country is supposed to prosper, right? The Nicaraguan Revolution, followed by violent reactions and misguided communist reforms, replaced one dictatorship with another system of oppression, proving how revolutions can betray the very people they claim to free. During the early 20th century, the United States of America's economic growth was soaring, and in order to keep the U.S. at that level of progress, President William Howard Taft implemented dollar diplomacy. Using this foreign policy, U.S. bankers were able to loan to the Nicaraguan administration. Dollar diplomacy allowed for the U.S. to sway and change the decision of the Nicaraguan government. As civil unrest rose due to the enforcement of dollar diplomacy, American forces invaded Nicaragua to protect its interests in a possible canal route in the banana plantations of American produce suppliers. In 1927, the U.S., in order to stop the Civil War, formed the Pact of Espizo Negro. This allowed for the U.S. supervision of elections and established the National Guard as the sole military force. Through a fraudulent election, they inaugurated U.S. Coast Guard Commander Antonio Somoza. For the next 43 years, the Somoza family, backed by the American military, suppressed rebellions, punished outliers, and kept the family ruling. This state of governance prevailed in Nicaragua until 1959, when Cuba's revolution changed the mind of Nicaraguans across the country. Anti-American ideologies had already spread throughout the country, but the ideas of Latin Americans taking back their land from American imperialism shifted people's perspectives. As the anti-Yaquismo mentality simmered, many lower and middle-class citizens protested. A name that would rise from the ashes as a hero of the country, Augusto Santisto. This is the beginning of the Sandinista National Liberation Front.
Over the next 20 years, the FSLN would gain quite a following. The tipping point for them was the assassination of Pedro Joaquin Armando, a leader of a fellow opposition group against Somoza. With reports saying that it was Somoza's doing that caused Armando's death, the FSLN would unite to overthrow Somoza. In 1980, the FSLN would succeed in overthrowing Somoza and assassinating him. Now that as Somoza was out of the way, the FSLN would take over the government, with Daniel Ortega leading Nicaragua. But now what? Well, Nicaragua would end up becoming the most powerful country in the world. Oh wait, wrong script. Although the consensus was that the FSLN taking over was what the country needed, the impact they provided gave mixed opinions. For one, the FSLN leaned towards a Marxist way of leading the country. In response to this new leadership, a group of anti-communist rebels, known as the Contras, would begin to wage war against the FSLN.
After years of fighting between the American-backed Contras and the FSLN, in 1987, they would eventually sign a peace treaty. While this would signify the end of the war, the lasting effects were just about to be made known. As Nicaraguans picked up the pieces of their old regime, Ortega would suddenly begin to introduce his ideas into the Nicaraguan administration. This pattern of corruption was eerily similar to that of Somoza's rule. This time, though, the people had already seen what had happened before and knew what to do to supposedly stop the cycle. In 1990, the US-backed National Oppression Union defeated Ortega and the FSLN and had Violeta Armando elected into presidency. The people rejoiced. They finally had a president who would lead the country of Nicaragua into prosperity. Well, that's what they thought would happen.
Violeta Chamorro intended to be the spark plug that would lead Nicaragua into the golden age of prosperity. She did her best and even reduced the hyperinflation caused by the presidents before her. But she couldn't overcome the biggest trial of them all: stabilize the economy. The main factor for the success of a country is its economy, and when a country doesn't have a strong economy, the country itself is not succeeding. Even though her effects would lead to the World Bank canceling 80% of Nicaragua's debt, it still wasn't enough to fix the economy. But despite her shortcomings, she would send the country into a slow but steady upward trajectory. Unfortunately, in 2006, Ortega would be re-elected back into the presidency. This re-election was detrimental to the cause that many people fought and worked for. All the progress that was done and made an attempt to build their economy out the trenches was undone before they could even get out of the pit. Many citizens had hoped for stability, but fear lingered that history would repeat itself, that the promises and dreams of reform would once again overshadow the daily struggles of ordinary people, that the ordinary people would struggle repeatedly If you look at Nicaragua today, you'll sadly see that these promises are yet to be fulfilled, and were just empty promises made by people in power. Nicaragua ranks around the 145th mark globally for GDP, putting it in the bottom 25% of all countries in the world. Nicaragua's healthcare system is severely underfunded and is tailored to the rich. Gangs and violence are more rampant than ever. The poor are still poor and the rich get richer. In the exact words of my grandfather, if you do not support or work for the government, you have no opportunity to progress. He was there for this revolution. He was told these promises, and he was told that it would get better. He was lied to. There is more hunger and poverty than ever. The freedoms that they were promised are nothing more than a great big lie.
The whole point of a revolution was for extreme change to occur for the good of the people. Yet here they were again, back to square one. The sacrifices they made, the time spent at war, all to be undone by corruption. The people finally realized that this change would never come about, and these constant patterns and cycles of corruption would never fully be broken. Once the people realized, many people made a difficult choice. They chose to leave their homeland for a better opportunity. But the dream of liberation soon showed its cracks, and the voices that saw past the slogans. Catherine Hout, who lived through the revolution, later recalled how her house became a gathering place for Sandinista fighters. She described how people prepared for an uprising. They built air raid shelters, collected supplies, and listened for broadcasts on Radio Sandito. These were not just fighters, they were ordinary citizens organizing for what they believed would be a new, just society. Yet when Washington Post reporters visited a nationalized farm in 1985, they found a different side of the revolution. At Janquito Vaca, peasants didn't speak much of ideology. They worried about food, pay, and survival. One man confided painfully that he might be drafted into the People's Army when he turned 18, and he wasn't sure if he could resist. Even as Sandistas promised equality and redistribution, scarcity remained. Lines for food stretched long, and state-owned stores were half empty. Workers spoke of rationing, inflation, and a government that preached revolutionary virtue but failed to meet its everyday needs. Digged deeper, even among those who once believed frivolity, disillusionment grew. Exiles later testified to the U.S. Department about religious persecution under Sandistas. Churches were suppressed, Catholic leaders were targeted, and entire communities were uprooted. Some in the Jewish community said they faced anti-Semitic prejudice. These were not side stories. They were the lived-in realities of people whose hopes had turned into fear. Even the observers who were not hostile to the Sandistas saw alarming patterns. Robert S. Leakin, after spending 10 days in Nicaragua, returned appalled and angry. He criticized what he called political indoctrination, mismanagement, and authoritarian control, the very things the revolution claimed to fight. Finally, decades later, some of those who stayed silent started speaking up. Former political prisoners, religious figures, and activists testified before international bodies about the continuity of repression under Ortega. The message was unmistakable. The nightmare of authoritarianism did not end in 1979. It had changed form. Revolutions promised freedom, but Nicaragua learned the bitter truth. Nicaraguan revolution, followed by violent reactions and misguided communist reforms, replaced one dictatorship with another system of oppression, betraying the very people it claimed to free. The revolution promised freedom, but Nicaragua knew a new flag cannot erase old chains. The people fought, they hoped, and they were let down. Leaders changed, ideology shifted, but oppression remained. Families went hungry, voices were silenced, and dreams of justice were replaced with the harsh reality of control and corruption. Even those who risked everything to defend the revolution found themselves trapped under the same chains they once tried to break. True liberation isn't something a revolution can hand down. It must be fought for, protected, and held accountable, or it will slip through the hands of those who dare to believe in it.
Porque para mí democracia no es simplemente que se den elecciones libres. Para mí democracia no es simplemente que se dé un recambio de élites políticas. Decimos justicia, democracia, pero también yo le agregaría igualdad y bienestar, ¿no?